Hello everyone, I'm Tony Barker, a front-end specialist at Anatech and various other things. I'm the lead developer with local gov Drupal, director of Drupal Camp England, and the media management track lead for Drupal CMS. Why did I choose to speak about BEM versus Tailwind and describe it as a death match? Well, first of all, if you're expecting any blood today, I think you're going to be a bit disappointed. So apologies for that, but perhaps things might get a little bit spicy. Why did I choose to talk about BEM versus Tailwind at this point? Well, a few months ago when the sessions opened for DrupalCon Vienna, I saw on LinkedIn what can only be described as an abusive exchange between a couple of people who are very passionate on either side of the argument between BEM and Tailwind. A lot of the comments out there are constructive, and there are articles which road test and do practical testing of the two front-end technologies. I'm going to talk a little bit about my practical experience and why maybe we take some of those tests with a pinch of salt because they're not our real world conditions. But also I was really interested to find out what I was missing as somebody who is biased on one side and has kind of experienced both, to find out why do people feel so strongly. So there's some balanced opinions and some constructive stuff, but there's a lot of people just saying that one's garbage, it's rant time, so I wanted to explore why. And the other thing you may have noticed in the Dries note is the Mercury theme is built with Tailwind. And the Drupal coding standards for a long time required, perhaps is too strong a word, but they're all built around BEM. So first of all, I'll explain why that is. But I think as a community, we need to look at the other sides from the technologies that we use day to day and explore new things and be adaptable. So first of all, if I can get a show of hands for who in the room would consider themselves to be a front-end developer. Quite a lot. I assume that the others aren't front-end developers, and I think whether you're a back-end developer or not a developer at all, you probably don't have as much experience with these technologies. So I think that's the distinction. And the other question for you, first of all, who is not passionate, who's got no skin in the game, who maybe wandered into the wrong talk, who doesn't really care either way to begin with, on either side, BEM versus Tailwind. Can I have a show of hands for the zero? I couldn't care less. Okay, quite a few. And at the other extreme, who would describe themselves as really passionate one way or the other? They really care, they really hate the opposition. Quite a few there as well, okay. That was the other thing, there were all these other technologies that comment was about Bootstrap, and people are trying to get their head around those things too, but for some reason Bootstrap doesn't inspire the same level of wrath as these two. So for the uninitiated, what do we mean by BEM? What does it stand for? And what is Tailwind? So BEM is for block element modifier. And there's a code example here. So the block in this case would be the service card. That's our component. Our modifier there is featured, so that's saying this is a featured service card. There can be lots of other modifiers. And then the component there is link, and they're denoted by the underscores for the elements and the modifiers with a couple of dashes. And very quick look at Tailwind. How does that look? Well, you get all of these classes. So these are utility classes. And what this is saying is we're going to set the pixel number, the color directly on this HTML tag. So a few insights before we dive into a bit of a comparison. I'm biased in one direction, and I looked at this to kind of explore the other side of the argument. So I picked a car in this case to describe why it's inevitable that I'm going to have a biased opinion and influence you. So let's get stuck into that. I chose a car. We can think of BEM as describing the car in terms of its doors, its windows, its wheels, its headlights. So these are all things that in the BEM world we might describe as blocks or elements. They're named for something that we can see on the page usually. On the other hand, in the world of Tailwind, we're describing these by their sizes, colours. So we have no concept really of in Tailwind of a door. What we have is a white object about so high that opens and closes. So that's a kind of a real world example of why I suppose we have these things named classes in the first place. These in object-oriented programming are classes. So Tailwind is a new kid on the block that doesn't follow those conventions. So I think that's the first place where some of this bio comes from. The other thing to consider is characterization, bias, and tribalism. So inertia as well. We're used to using one technology, maybe we're resistant to change. And we must be influenced when somebody has a bad experience with a technology. And I picked a couple of kind of cute characters for each. So we have an alchemist for BEM and an architect for Tailwind in this case. But if I had chosen a wolf or a monster or something like that, that can influence how we feel about technologies too, I think. The other thing is entropy, humans, and performance, and disallowing certain arguments for and against. So the first thing is entropy. Things moving toward a disordered state. That's going to happen whatever technology we use. So our system is only as good as how we use the system, and cracks are going to sneak in over time if we don't code things perfectly. And we're humans, so generally we don't code things like robots. And the other one is performance. Performance, you can argue so many different ways, and as I say, you can do tests and have outcomes lots of different ways. It really depends a lot on what you're building, how big your website is, and how you actually code and apply things. So you can have a very tiny code base for BEM, and Tailwind provides a purge feature, but it won't work if you use variables in your application of classes. So that is a massive topic I'm not going to get into because I think it's in the marginal gains. So when it comes to your website, there are so many more things that you can do for performance than to worry about this. I think there are much more compelling factors in your choice. So performance is one I won't look at. So the rules of engagement, the code examples are illustrative. I created them to demonstrate things, so that doesn't mean they're going to work in the browser. I might have made a faux pas somewhere. I'm sure there's mistakes in there and things aren't applied properly. Certainly it's not running code. I have opinions of bias, and I want you to make it known if you strongly disagree with something I say. Raise your hand. We have a roving mic if you want to make a comment contradictory to one of my arguments, and you can use the QA in the app all throughout the session. And at certain points I'll ask you to raise your hands just to get a feel of the room. So let's dive into the scenarios. So the first one that I've come up with is this inherited code. The team wins a new client and inherits a 5-year-old code base. What do you hope to find? Do you hope to see beautifully realised BEM? Are you shocked and appalled when you see that many classes in the HTML and you want to run for the hills? Some of this is going to be objective and based on our bias. But whichever way you lean at the moment, consider this. How after 3 years, 5 years, that code base, as I said, has probably got some holes in it, and you can do bad things in both technologies. So in this case, we've got some things that aren't, first of all, they're not using variables, and we have this in our code base. Who's going to win this war? It's not neat, it's not tidy, it's not going to be easy to work with. On the flip side, somebody frustrated has given up on trying to use the utility classes to get their thing done, and they've gone for the biggest crime of them all, the important. So who wins the inherited code round? I think this is based probably on your experiences, who's in your team, what you used to working with. So first of all, can I have a show of hands for BEM? And a show of hands for Tailwind. And I think the BEM just edits it. These are non-binding votes to begin with. We'll have a big vote at the end, just to get a poll. Does anybody want to counter anything that I've said so far, or throw in a comment? No, let's crack on. The next one is the brand change. Marketing has rebranded a service and wants to reflect the change on the website. So, the first thing to say, if you have constructed your Tailwind classes this way, you're in big trouble because you have used actual colour names all the way through your templates, and that means you're probably going to have to rewrite a lot of templates to make this happen. We can use find and replace, but still we're probably going to be in a mess there. So we can do this in Tailwind by setting some things in the config to set a primary a set of primary classes, and that means that we can do something similar to using variables in BEM, like this. On the other hand, I'm sure we've all seen code bases that have just got hard-coded hex values. So this is why I've been on a bit of a journey with exploring the two technologies, and I realised a lot of the things that I criticised Tailwind for do actually happen in BEM themes too. So the second part to the brand change, marketing is rolling out a new platinum service and wants to reflect the change on the website. So something like this, where we're going to have a new brand colour. In BEM, I reckon this is really easy to do, even if you haven't thought of it in advance and accounted for it in advance. We can just use a modifier there and have a service card with a platinum brand. Something like this. But we can actually do a similar thing in Tailwind, and we can create some new configuration and set platinum. However, my view would be this is probably harder to do in Tailwind than BEM. So just a quick show of hands for brand changes. And I reckon the vote is probably going to go a similar way each round because you already have this inherent bias. But let's have a quick show of hands for BEM. And for Tailwind. Okay. And does anybody have anything to extend what I've said about branding or anything to contradict any arguments in that round? Yes, could we have the mic here?
You can also combine Tailwind.
We'll just bring a mic over for the recording.
Yes, just that you can also combine Tailwind with other traditional approaches in terms of creating variables.
Yeah, that's true. That's true, and we can have hybrid code bases. That's definitely something to bear in mind where people are using, starting with BEM and then applying some utility classes. Okay. Sorry? Did you want to? Yeah.
I just want to also add that with Tailwind, if you're using those, blue 600, blue 500, you're making probably an architecture mistake from the start.
Yeah.
Because that comes with like a million of those colors, and like you pointed out, like if you want to change something, you either have to go to blue 600 in the main CSS file, and then who knows what can happen from there. So.
Yeah. So I think a lot of people, from the comments that I've seen, are choosing Tailwind for speed to get set up rapidly. I'm probably not thinking too much about the architectural points. Let's move on to scenario number 3, late night debugging. So here, an on-call engineer is notified of a bug. They can see the styling of some components are broken and need to debug the problem, so opens the inspector. Okay, the first thing to say about this scenario, I think this was my biggest eye-opener when I was looking into the systems. So we've got some red text here that shouldn't be read. So what's happened? My bias stemmed from opening the inspector and seeing so many classes and being overwhelmed and thinking, where on earth do I look for this? But in fact, compared to BEM, that just it's easier to find the element in all of that markup. But in fact, even with Tailwind, what I'm informed, and this isn't through my own experience, is that when you open up this part of the inspector to look at the classes and the styles that are there, things are crossed out. So the styles that are being applied rise to the top. You can see that they're being applied, and actually debugging isn't too hard for an experienced Tailwind developer. And just to say similarly, we can do the same, we can make the same mistakes in both technologies. This is just a recurring theme. I expected to find a clear winner, and what I actually found was that we can make the same mistakes all the way through, regardless of the technologies. So, yeah, please.
There's a problem that I have had when I've used like dumb naming standards, like the naming practice
Yeah.
and templates, when I'm using it in conjunction with, sorry to say this, for example, using Bootstrap, which I don't possibly avoided. But the problems that I find is that in the built-in CSS that will come with whatever that framework is, they are using too high specificity by concatenating these class names when they're multiple class names. And then I got, like, I used to be an addict to them, naming
Okay.
standards, but it started to turn into a problem because I never could get quite the right specificity to override whatever was coming out of Foundation or Bootstrap or whatever.
Yeah. So, I think you're probably in trouble if you try to apply the over the top of Bootstrap, because it's already opinionated, so it's not properly following the system. But what I can say for specificity, if I can actually say the word, which is a bit of a struggle, there are loads of references, and I have to look up references sometimes. But the most common problem that I find is, let's say that I'm using a class, and somewhere else in the code, we've got an HTML element combined in the class. So I think whenever we hit one of those problems, that's probably where we're spending most of our debugging time as a front-end developer. They're just not easy problems to solve. So yeah, I use references and look at that particular piece of code, and I might spend half an hour or an hour working through it to figure out exactly who should win the battle and how to solve the problem. Sorry, I can't hear you.
So what I was just saying is that you had an example of what I'm talking about, like right there, page contents H3, right there is already a little bit more higher specificity, so it's going to be kind of hard to override if you're just trying to go on like that naming practices alone.
Yeah, it can, but in this case, if we applying BEM properly, we can do something like page content underscore heading, and then we can precisely locate that element in the code. So who wins the late night debugging round? A quick show of hands for BEM. Not so many this time. And for Tailwind. Let's not get violent and physical. Okay, I reckon that's a tie.
So in this case, actually, neither did anything wrong. BEM and if you go back to your code, neither BEM or Tailwind were the fault of the color being red.
Exactly.
So neither one of them mattered at that point.
Exactly.
They were both irrelevant.
Yeah.
So that's why I didn't vote.
Okay. Fair play.
Yeah, I mean, I'm out. For me, the thing with BM is actually finding it. I know we've got things like debug in Drupal, but if I see a text grade 900 and I search it in my code base, I'll struggle to find that, whereas I can find service stuff like I find the component. But
Yeah.
that's my vote for that.
Yeah, searchability. The counter argument to that would be that you can locate a component in its file name.
Another thing is that in this example here with BEM, it actually is valid in a way. But if you go to Tailwind. Like it's confusing because then suddenly you have the code that says text gray 900.
Yeah.
That doesn't match reality at all.
It doesn't.
Like
but
the other, like in BM, it can be the reality that you actually want it to be overwritten as red.
yeah.
But I cannot see how this can ever be right because
Be-
it says gray.
Well, because this is what humans do when they come up against a problem and create a bug. Bugs don't occur if we get everything right.
Yeah, exactly. Mistakes happen. That's
Yeah.
what Tailwind.
Okay, one more, yeah.
Regarding searchability, if you're using BEM naming standards, I have found it's also a problem that it's very nice in SCSS when you can use these concatenation marks. So basically you have a block of code and then the entire class name gets divided into different sections. And then you try to search the code base for the full class name and you can't find it.
Yeah, that's true. And it happens if we use variables too. So scenario number 4, print style sheet. We want to improve the experience for users printing information from the website. Let's add a print style sheet. So who honestly, when they receives a design from the designer that has print style sheets factored into the equation and codes from the beginning with print style sheets in mind? Probably not too many. I'm not going to get anybody into trouble by asking them to admit that. So this was new to me. So Tailwind provides these print classes. So we get print hidden is one of the options here.
You think prints colon, like print colon background gray 200 or?
I don't know. Maybe this is one for a Tailwind expert.
Oh yeah, it says that. Sorry, it says that. Yeah.
So the answer is yes. You can apply anything with that. On the other hand, and this is one where my BEM friends in the room might want to challenge me, but we can. I think in this case it's more difficult probably with BEM. If we want to change the header or the footer and hide those from the print style sheet, we can go into every component, or we could set some global rules like this and get nuclear with it. And we can also just apply to the service card here something like page break inside a void. That's going to stop that component from splitting over a couple of pages of A4 or something like that. But who wins the print style sheet round? I'm going to tell you what I think, and it's controversial. I reckon Tailwind probably trumps on this one. So let's have a quick show of hands for BEM. Wow. A couple of people almost putting their hand up. And for Tailwind, a clear winner there. Build from scratch. And I've got lots of scenarios, we might not get through them all, but I'd much rather have this discussion than just sprint through everything on my own and leave your comments to the end. So build from scratch. We're building a new website from scratch. Which front-end technology should we choose? So that was an incomplete slide, apologies. I think it depends on so many factors. So how does our project timeline look? Who's involved in the project? When do we need it by? Do we have a deadline 4 weeks away? Are we building a theme just for one website, or is it for our agency starter kit that we're going to reuse over and over again? I think there are so many factors that come into this one. Another question for us, one of the criticisms of Tailwind is that we can apply something like padding 4 to one element and padding 5 to the next one. We can get inconsistencies. We can do a similar thing in BEM, but it's probably less likely. But an interesting kind of thought with that is, if we construct perfect box models all the time with all our spacing perfect, do we actually lose a bit of personality, lose a bit of creativity? Do we want something that where the developer has been a bit expressive and seen on the page that something looks good to their eye, but perhaps it's not pixel perfect? And the main factor here is obviously time. In an ideal world, if we've got forever to construct our perfect code, we might choose one option over the other. I reckon Tailwind is probably a clear winner for rapid prototyping. I know that it takes me a very long time to even decide what to name my classes, what my naming components is difficult. So it might be a nice problem not to have to do that. So who wins for you the build from scratch round? Any votes for BEM? And for Tailwind? That's interesting. As we're moving through the presentation, we're getting more and more votes for Tailwind. It's going to be the last scenario, and then I'll skip a couple. So a back-end developer needs to make a tiny theming change. Let's not consider whether they should be making that change. Let's assume that it's entirely necessary. So we can all, as front-end developers, get very snobby about our about reflecting our design on the page, and we spend a lot of time and we're committed to these incredible front-end experiences, but sometimes things just need to get done. In the case of a back-end developer, there's no front-end developer around at the time. They are the resource and they need to make a change. They don't know how to follow the BEM naming convention. So they're probably doing something like this, which, if we're being honest, we've probably done that ourselves sometimes when we're tired. Similarly, in Tailwind, we might say that this is close enough. So we've got a 5 pixel spacing instead of 6. We've got a slightly different shade of blue. We've missed the hover state, which is obviously terrible for accessibility. But to the back-end developer, this looks okay. Maybe a front-end developer is going to come and tidy that up in the next round of development. But it happened. Now, I reckon, in this case, it's far easier to make a mistake with Tailwind because you're coding all those utility classes for each individual template. But I'm interested to hear what you think. So can I have a show of hands for BEM? And a show of hands for Tailwind? BEM just edges that one, I think. I'm going to skip this one just for time. You can guess what that one was. So let's have any kind of closing comments from any of you who'd like to say something.
So just a spoiler on this slide.
Yeah.
I'm going to choose love because one of the powers of Tailwind is you can use BEM classes but then apply Tailwind utility classes in your CSS. So you don't have to choose, you can still use your Tailwind setup, but then use the semantic classes. And that's, to me, is the true love of it all.
It could also be called sitting on the fence, but
Yes, exactly. Sure. I mean, I choose not war as a, you know.
I think one additional scenario that you could consider is how many other front-end developers are working with me on
Yeah.
this project. When you get into like naming conventions and how you label your elements, for me I think Tailwind gets a little bit better if you have a bunch of people all swarming on different components. You can be sure that people are mostly doing things the same way.
yeah, and if you have, say, 3 or 4 developers all committing code at the same time, yeah, you're more likely to be consistent with Tailwind.
Well, I would like to also mention that regarding Tailwind, backend developer or anyone involved in the project, it's just modifying the XML. For BEM, it would have to start a Gauss server or something
Yeah,
in order to do the process. So
create a
the
library and all
developer
those
should
things.
know how to do this.
But it's that question of whether people want to spend time to custom code something versus getting up and running quickly and making changes rapidly. Yeah,
So personally, I prefer BEM, and it would be very arrogant to say that using Tailwind is wrong, but using Tailwind is wrong. So
okay.
It's arrogant to assume that just because you're not used to one tool means that it's unusable for anything. Like
Yeah.
BEM has its uses, and Tailwind definitely also has its uses. I don't really agree with mixing them in there.
Okay,
I think that causes some
Yeah.
interesting new issues, but I also use Tailwind for some things. I'm sorry, Mom.
Okay, so we're going to have a final vote, and this is not a soft option. So you're not voting for a preference. What you're voting for is to entirely kill off BEM, entirely kill off Tailwind forever, or choose love. Let them both live side by side, and people who prefer one or the other use them. But from what we've seen with Mercury, the Mercury theme, whether we like it or not, we might be moving towards Tailwind for working with Drupal Canvas. So I know which one I'm choosing. So who would like to kill off BEM? One person. We'll get you some security as you leave. And who would like to kill off Tailwind? Again, one person. And 2? Yeah? Okay. And who chooses love? Incredible. So just as we wrap up, I will be on the open stage at 5:05, just talking about my year and a bit in Drupal contribution. There are some great talks that I'm excited for, not least my Anatech colleague John, who has a couple of talks on Thursday, and the local Gov Drupal session tomorrow. And I'll be at Drupal Camp Scotland in November, local Gov Drupal Week, which is online, check that out, and Drupal Camp England next March, and Dev Days in Athens next spring. So thank you everyone.